If the work week is stressing you out and you're searching for a relaxing Sunday morning vibe, then come over and enjoy Sunday mornings with a cup of Joe with your host, Joey Stacks, as he takes you on a weekly journey for your soul that starts with a relaxing cup of Joe. So if you're in need of some great conversation with a splash of neo soul, then you're in the right place. So tune in as we catch a cool vibe with Sunday mornings with a cup of Joe.
I was stronger, ready to change. But when I find the strength to rise up, all the pieces get rearranged.
It's like cold brew with ice in it. What up, though, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Sunday Mornings with a Cup of Joe. I'm your host, Joey Stacks, a.k.a. Joe. And today's episode, well, before we get into today's episode, I wanted to go over a little dilemma I was having. I love having a podcast because I get to speak candidly with you guys about any kind of personal things or anything that I'm going through or any issues or whatever. And I'm having an issue with this Joey Stacks or Joe thing. So if you know me from my past, you know that I used to be a full-time artist. My rap name is Joey Stacks. I've been using that name for about maybe like 10 years. Before that, my name was Young Gutta, Gutta. I got out of the name Young Gutta because of some contractual issues and because the marketable issue with the name. So I was given the name Joey Stacks by a friend of mine, and I used that for a long time. But I was thinking about changing my name just using Joe. Not like Just Joe, like, you know, because it got like Just Hilarious and Just Brittany and just hella people named Just. Not like that. More like, you know, regular Joe or just plain Joe. I always introduce myself as Joe. That's always been my thing. I never really introduced myself as Joey Stacks. A lot of my friends, you know, people call me Joey Stacks. The name Joey is actually a name that I didn't allow people that didn't really know me personally to really call me until I got to the age where I wanted to use it as like my rap name or whatever, because most of my family and close friends will call me Joey, but everybody else mostly call me Joe. But I do have friends and associates and homies that call me Stacks or still call me Young Gutta. And there's nothing wrong with that. But on this podcast journey, I was just wondering, should I switch it up to Joe or should I keep it at Joey Stacks? I don't know. I might take, matter of fact, I'm going to take a poll. I'll put a poll out. If you got an idea, hit me on my DM or email it. Leave a comment. Yeah, I'm just wondering, should I switch it up? Should I just do just Joe regular? I'll be switching up the intro throughout the episodes, you know, playing with different ones. And, you know, and you guys get to take the journey with me, you know, on this journey to find out what fits on this podcast world. So, you know, this episode, well, before we get into the episode again, I want to talk about the last episode. Thanks for everybody that was supportive of the last episode 0.5. I named the episode 0.5 because it was a test episode. The episode was supposed to be a collection of conversations that I had about the Pusha T and Drake beef. But what ended up happening between time restraints and the fact that Jay Prince came and ended that shit pretty ASAP, I had to hurry up and get the content out. I really couldn't sit on it anymore. So I was able to get my homeboy Kev from the Global Agenda Show. Everybody check out his show. It's called The Global Agenda Show. Check him out on Facebook and everything. His show is filled with a lot of great guests and some in-depth content that I think everybody will like. And I had the other guests I had on there was my homeboy Cali Just One, vintage clothing expert. Check him out too on IG, Cali Just Ones, Facebook. He does vintage clothing. He does memorabilia. He does merch, concert merch, everything from WWF to Bone Thugs and Harmony. Whatever you need, he got it. Jerseys, hats, that's his thing. He got a unlimited collection of Stockton Porch memorabilia. So make sure you get at him at Cali Just One. And yeah, I got a lot of feedback about the first episode, the test episode, and thanks for everybody for sharing y'all thoughts and everything. I really appreciate it. I would start letting the guests talk more. I started letting the guests talk more, and I was nervous as shit. I'm not gonna hold you up. I was very nervous. I taped a lot of my podcast episodes before, but that episode was the first time I decided to publish one of them. So I'm glad everybody enjoyed it, and they'll get better as time go along, and we'll fill this thing out and keep it rocking. But today's episode, we'll be talking about podcasts and my love for podcasts, where I started listening to podcasts, why, and where I'm at today in this journey on this podcasting realm. I started listening to podcasts a very long time ago. I probably started listening to podcasts maybe 10, 12 years ago, possibly. The first time I ever heard a podcast was maybe 2008. So yeah, about 10 years ago, maybe 2008 was the first time that I listened to a podcast. I used to listen to a lot of underground rap radio, a lot of internet radio, pirate radio. I'm into like underground hip hop. I'm into like smooth hip hop, and I'm into like trap, real hustle hip hop. And when like back 10 years ago, YouTube, I don't know if people really understand this or really get the grasp of this, but YouTube just really came out in like 2006. So like in 2008, it just only had been out for 2 years, so everybody didn't have content on there at the rate that they do now. So like to find underground hip hop, you would have to listen to like internet radio stations or pirate radio stations. So I was like really into that. And one day I was listening to I was listening to this pirate radio station from Florida, and they mentioned this podcast that two New York DJs had. It was called Juan Epstein. And when I heard it, caught my attention, and I checked it out. When I first heard the name Juan Epstein, for those that you don't know, Juan Epstein is a character off a 1970s sitcom, Welcome Back, Kotter. I'm really not into 70s sitcoms. I'm more into 80s and 90s sitcoms. But, Different Strokes, Facts of Life, What's Happening. Some of the earlier ones, Cagney and Lacey, that's old. Okay. Yeah, that's old. I'm showing my age. No, but I piqued the interest in me because I never heard what a podcast was. They said it was like listening to talk radio. I really enjoy listening to talk radio. I've been a fan of talk radio for a long time. I used to listen to talk radio on the AM dial, where it was shows. I used to also listen to New York radio. Star and Buck Wild were one of my main shows back in the early 2000s, until they came under heat with the Aaliyah situation, where Star was actually playing plane crash sounds. Yeah, in the back while they was actually talking about Aaliyah right around the time she died, and that was a big situation. I think they ended up firing some people or something. I remember Star and Buck Wild and Miss Jones, but I've been listening to talk radio for a long time. As talk radio kind of faded out, it kind of transitioned into like internet radio shows or internet radio. Then after that, it kind of transitioned into like YouTube TV shows, maybe, or like, well, not YouTube TV shows, like YouTube interview platforms. And it's okay, but I like a more uncensored style of talking. I like a more no holds bars, barbershop style debates. I like to listen to podcasts because it's almost like listening to an audio book. You can peek inside of other people's conversations. You can hear knowledgeable, interesting conversations about people's professions. You can hear conversations about people way of living, other people's thoughts or opinion. You can have an opinion about anything, and you can have an idea about anything. And with this platform, you are able to share those ideas with a wide range of listeners. So, podcast was always something that I always listened to. I love debate. I like arguing. Not arguing like in a malicious way, but I like arguing. I like debating. Me and my friends, we engage in hours of debate. Me and my girlfriend, we debate. That's just the thing. A lot of times I like to set up debates where we pick sides. We like to come off the top. We like to get in to have like community forums where we get to discuss different situations that's going on in our community and with among us, and ways that we can come up with solutions to solve some of these problems that we have in the urban community or in the world period. And so I just love listening to conversations. I love debates. The new trend in podcasts is something interesting. It has been a new trend with everybody starting a podcast recently, and it's kind of oversaturated the market a little bit, and it's made it like where I was listening to, what did I listen to the other day? I was listening to a podcast the other day made by the people that make the breaks. That make the, when I say make the breaks, I'm talking about make the brake pads. the brake pads that come in the box. Yeah, they had a podcast, and the podcast was just going over brake pads and different variations of warranties and stuff, and it was just very interesting seeing how podcasts just become so popular over the last few years that you can find a podcast about almost anything you want to. I have heard so many podcasts about absolutely nothing. I heard podcasts about everything from left, right wing, alt-right, Democrats, Republicans, the Tea Party, the Green Party, Independents. I have heard podcasts about everything from religious to activists to motivational podcasts. I listen to a lot of motivational podcasts. I'll be sharing some later on in the show. I have heard podcasts about everything under the sun. I had to get something to drink. I'm drinking like a tea, coffee mix. I make like a cold brew coffee and I mix it with like a black tea with a little honey, and I put some ice in it. It's delicious too. When I have a guest on, I guess I'll make some. Yeah, that'll be interesting. When my guests come on, I'll make some of my little tea coffee mix and serve them. But yeah, so I love like with the new trend. Oh, I almost got off track. With the new trend of podcasting, this has become a little bit oversaturated. They have podcasts about everything, and you can listen to a podcast just about almost anything. My selection of podcasts, I probably keep at this moment probably like 15 podcasts on my playlist. And after every few months, sometime I go through there, reorganize it, delete some, it just depends on, because sometimes you run into some and they really don't be talking about anything interesting, or it's like a copy. I've seen a lot of copycat podcasts of other people podcasts, and it's blatant ripoffs. And as a creator, I don't see the need to rip somebody off when we're not doing nothing but sharing something. You're sharing your ideas, sharing something that you read. Even if you were going to rip somebody's idea off, you should just share it as an idea that you ripped off from somebody. I'm also co-hosting another podcast called Shut the Front Door, which will be airing this July. I'm thinking we're going to roll it out maybe around the 4th of July. It's my homeboy at Cali Just One, and my homeboy QEP Newton, aka QP. And that's going to be a very interesting podcast. We're going to have a lot of fun on there. We're breaking down a lot of things about pop culture and a lot of different topics. We're going to be interviewing a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of creators and a lot of different artists. It's going to be very, very interesting. We're going to be sharing a lot of information and knowledge on that. So everybody be ready to check that out. It's called Shut the Front Door. Follow us on Instagram at Shut the Front Door Podcast at Instagram. And yeah, and also the Sunday Mornings with a Cup of Joe will be on the Shut the Front Door podcast webpage. So be ready to check that out. But yeah, so, and another thing about recording a podcast is I love barbershop talk shit. Like, if you know anything about, especially the African American, the black culture, like, barbershop talk is a time for us. That's a time that's a place where we go. That's a sanctuary where we exchange information, a lot of real information, a lot of bullshit. You get people a lot of not entrepreneurship knowledge. You get a lot of things in the barbershop. You get a lot of game, a lot of swag. You get a lot of information on what to do or what not to do. Just around, because it's like a gumbo pot of people there. You know, when you go to a barbershop, you got people from all over town coming to get their hair cut by these select few barbers. And, you know, a haircut, people always look at haircuts like, well, you know, I get a haircut by this person. I just get a haircut by anywhere. But in the African-American community, haircuts is like, you know, it's a very intimate situation. So, like, you go get a haircut, it's by your barber. Like, so being in the barbershop, it's a free zone. You get to talk about anything. You just talk about anything you want to, as long as you're not disrespecting nobody or starting fights. It's all gravy in the barbershop. So barbershop talk is something in our culture that's like real pivotal for us to exchange information. I remember, like, I learned a lot of things from being in the shop. You get on new things, learn about everything from fashion to education to religion, and everybody shares a strong view about their opinion, but they're really acclimated on really sharing it and really like beating it in. So, and it's always fun to watch. Sports is another big thing. What we talk about in the barbershop, sports is a very, very big thing, and I think 90% of the barbershops in urban communities, especially on Saturday mornings, if you ever want to go somewhere and get a vibe and some conversation in, no holds bars, no boundaries, no political views, go to a barbershop, a black barbershop on Saturday morning. They'll get you together. You get you all the way together. You'll be in there. You'll come out of there with another point of view about everything that you thought that you knew about. And you might even get a DVD from an up-and-coming rapper and a plug on some new movies. Even though you don't got a DVD player, you might still get the plug on some new movies at the barbershop. You might find a short set, a sandwich, all type of plugs. People come in the barbershop selling everything, but the talk of the barbershop, the shared conversation, the sharing of knowledge and information, it's almost like a database of information. Like, you could just go there and just pick people's minds about different things. And I look at the barbershop as someplace sacred to our community, and that's something that we should always respect and uphold and uplift and support our local barbers and barbershops. I got some friends, some of my close friends are local barbers, and I like to subscribe to the each one teach one thing, and I learned a lot from my barbers over the past. I've been going to the same couple barbers since I've been like a kid, and I know a lot of people that feel the same way, and the conversation that's shared inside the barbershop is very, very, very important to just different learning situations. So that's something that I would say, that go out and support your local barbers, because we can't let barbershop talk die. Yeah, that's something. So another part of this podcasting is that if you're searching for knowledge, I'm like an information buff. I'm always out looking for more information. I'm watching documentaries. I'm reading newspapers, magazines, books. I read a lot of books. A lot of people don't know that, or you might know if you know me, because come over, I got a lot of books. But I like to read. I'm an information junkie. I always like to learn. I don't like to waste time. I don't like to have meaningless conversations. I don't like to mix my music with talking. That's why I like to listen to podcasts. When it's time to listen to music, I like listening to music. When it's time to talk, I like to politic. I don't like to talk over music and do all that other extra weird stuff. No, I just like to listen, or I'm speaking. It don't go two ways at one time. Either I'm listening or I'm speaking, and that's how I like to keep it. So I'm going to give you guys some history of my podcast that I listen to and the reasons why, and some suggestions on some podcasts you guys should check out that like you might enjoy. So here we go. My first podcast that I said that I listened to was Juan Epstein. Juan Epstein is a podcast by Peter Rosenberg and Cypher Sounds, two New York DJs, and they started the podcast, and it had to be around 2008ish or 9, because that's when I first started listening to it, and it was on a pretty pretty beginning stages of it. Peter Rosenberg is a Jewish DJ from New York. Well, he's not from New York, but he DJs in New York. And Cypher Sounds, a Puerto Rican DJ that also hosts an improv comedy show. I think that's on television. And Peter Rosenberg also has a TV show, I think, that just started on Vice. And Peter Rosenberg also does like wrestling commentating too. I think he also has a wrestling podcast. But they do a lot of interviews with hip hop legends, interviews with comedians, actors. I have heard interviews from everybody from Rakim to Duck Down. I think Duck Down anniversary interview was one of my favorite interviews. I used to listen to Duck Down when I was younger, and the Boot Camp Click and Helter Skelter, and that used to be my zone of hip hop. So I really enjoy listening to those episodes of Juan Epstein. It's more like hip hop nerd type of podcast, but I really, really enjoy it. It's no longer on. I think they stopped recording episodes last year, if I'm not mistaken, because I guess both of them, they just really didn't have no time to finish doing any more episodes. But if you guys get time to check that out, Juan Epstein, it's like 1 million episodes, and they're all good, man. It's everybody on there from Chris Rock to it's everybody. It's so many hip hop artists on Juan Epstein, and it's a very enjoyable podcast. I really like it. I think you will like it too. I'm a hip hop historian, and I'm into like hip hop history and the arts and the culture. A lot of people don't understand what goes into hip hop because they see rap so much, and they think it's just rap. Rap is a form of hip hop. Rap is a form of MCing, a form of music that comes from MCing. But I'm into hip hop. It's a way of life. You eat, sleep, breathe hip hop more than just listen to it. So Juan Epstein, that's a very good podcast for anybody that wants some hip hop history knowledge, get real technical. I remember listening to Ninth Wonder on there and him describing mixing and beats, and it's just a very technical and a very detailed, interesting podcast. You guys should go check it out. It's called Juan Epstein. The next podcast that I got on was another podcast. It was called The Read. The Read was a podcast by Crystals and Kid Fury. Kid Fury, I think, is from Miami, and Crystals is from Oklahoma. I got on the podcast because I went to a conference before and met a friend in Arkansas that I guess knew about this podcast from a place he worked at. He did advertisement, and he told me, he was like, "Hey Joe, don't you listen to podcasts?" I'm like, "Yeah." He was like, "Check out this podcast called The Read." He was like, "It's this guy on there named Kid Fury and this girl on there named Crystals," and he was like, it's pretty funny. And when I checked it out, it's very, very interesting listening to two people that have a obvious friendship that goes back and forth with hilarious banter about everything under the sun. They're big Beyonce fans. They push a hard line for Black Power, Black excellence. They have an episode on their show called Black Excellence where they preview a person that's black, that's doing exceptionally well, everything from kids to adults. And it's a really positive show because it just speaks on where we at in this culture, where our opinions is at and how we dictate what's going on in pop culture, but never really get the credit. The Read is a very funny show. It is hilarious. It'll have you rolling from the time it come on to the end of the show. Like, I think hilarious is an understatement on how funny The Read is, but that's a good show. Everybody should go check that out. The Read. Shout out Kid Furies and Crystals. That's one of my top shows I watch or listen to. The next show is Combat Jack. The Combat Jack show is a show that's been out for a minute. Combat Jack is a show that is created by a guy, Reggie O'Shea. And we have to give a moment of silence. R.I.P. Combat Jack. Combat Jack, it used to be an entertainment lawyer in the hip hop. He dealt with a lot of big name celebrities from Noriega to Bad Boy to Rockefeller. He worked at Def Jam. He did like all the old school mid 90s contracts. Combat Jack had his hand in on them. He negotiated a lot of them. He did a lot, but he was just he was a Haitian guy, and he got his degree from Georgetown Law, and he just stopped being a hip hop lawyer to indulge into this podcast media platform. And he started a network called the Loudspeaker Network. The Loudspeaker Network is a network of other podcast shows. The Brilliant Idiots, Lip Service, Fan Bros, all Tax Season, all of these podcasts are up under the Loudspeakers Network, and it was developed by Combat Jack as a way to offer opportunities to other young creators and give them a platform to express their creativity. And he really did that, and he like put a lot of people on. You actually seen the growth of people he put on. For instance, Tax Stone from the show Tax Season. A lot of them know him from the Urban Plaza Troy Ave incident. But before he went to jail, man, Tax was really on the road to being one of the top urban podcasters out. If I'm not mistaken, he was one of the top urban podcasters when he went down. So hope Tax come home soon. I really enjoy his content. But Combat Jack is a show. It really set the trend, and it really set the mark of how you wanted to run it business-wise when it came to this platform and sharing your ideas, how you wanted to market them. And Combat Jack, I've actually seen Combat Jack do a lecture in the mid-2000s just on a whim, and even the information that I learned from him then, it carried with me, and I always applied it, and it was some very good information about the media business and about contracts. Some of that business actually helped me get out of a contract before, so yeah. Shouts out to Combat Jack. One of the next podcasts, and one of my favorite podcasts of all time, is the Brilliant Idiots podcast with Charlamagne the God and Andrew Schultz. The Brilliant Idiots podcast is a podcast that I've been listening to for about maybe 6 years. Yeah, maybe about 5 years so far. I might be off maybe a year or so, but around that time, Brilliant Idiots is a show by Charlamagne the God and Andrew Schultz. Charlamagne the God, you might know him from the Radio Power 105, The Breakfast Club, Uncommon Sense, and he also has a book out that I read. That's one of my favorite books up to this day. It's called Black Privilege Opportunity. It's called Black Privilege Opportunity Come to Those That Create It, and it was a very motivational, inspiring book. I would definitely recommend everybody, if you watch him on the Breakfast Club interviews and you think that's all it is, you should go check out his book, Black Privilege, Opportunity Come to Those That Create It. My girl bought it for me last year. I read the book 3 times so far. It is a really good book. It talks about his trials and tribulations, getting from being an intern to all the way up to his own show as of now, and being able to create shows for MTV2. And it was very inspirational. He talked about, in the book, before I get off the podcast subject, in the book he talks about being able to recognize opportunity when a paycheck not attached. And I found that so pivotal to me and what I do, because a lot of times, being a creator and as an artist, you have to be able to see opportunities when not necessarily it's a bag attached to those opportunities. I know a lot of times, and nowadays, we like to do everything for the cash, and that's also cool. But when you a creator, an entrepreneur, when you're doing something from your soul and your heart, sometimes you have to know that it takes sacrifices to be made to get to where you got to get to. And in some of them sacrifices, it might be monetary sacrifices. You might have to not get paid for 3 months to blow up on the 5th month. You might have to sleep on the couch for 2 years to really get where you always want to be the 3rd year. And I hear a lot of people talk about the grind. That's the premise of the grind. That's the foundation of the grind, knowing to be able to know when it's time to hold it down and really tough it out until you can, see your way out of it, whatever situation you in. So that's another thing, though. That book, Black Privilege, that's a really good book. And another thing about the Brilliant Idiots is that when you listen to them, they give you a perfect mix of brilliant conversation and idiot conversations. It's hilarious listening to Andrew Schulz. He's a comedian. He has outlandish views and opinions on different topics. It's very, very interesting listening to those two go back and forth. I also got up on Angela Rye from listening to their podcast. Angela Rye is this black lady. She holds a position, I think, or she does something in the Congressional Black Caucus. She also, I think, is like a liberal political analyst on CNN. And I learned a lot from listening to Angela Rye about what's going on currently in our government with Donald Trump being the president. And just she keep you updated about stuff that affects us. So that was very refreshing to hear her on a lot of the episodes. And with being a liberal, those point of views are well appreciated. So check out Brilliant Idiots, a very, very funny podcast. Andrew Schulz, his outlandish opinions and his comedy is, he's one of the, so let me get into this. Andrew Schulz is another person that I'm into comedy. I'm into stand-up improv. I'm into sketch comedy. And Andrew Schulz, he does stand-up comedy, and he's somebody that I listen to over and over, time after time. And I noticed that nowadays with comedians, it's like a undertone of laziness that reeks in their routine. And Andrew Schultz's routine is just refreshingly energetic and very good. I love his comedy. So yeah, check out The Brilliant Idiots. That's a very good show. Check out Charlemagne Book. Andrew Schulz has some comedy specials. I think is one on Tidal right now, so check that out. And another podcast that I like to listen to is the Conspiracy Therapy podcast. Everybody that know me that I love conspiracies. I'm definitely nosy, and I just love Investigation Report, and I love listening to conspiracies, especially Man on the Moon, JFK, Bohemian Grove, the Bay of Pigs, the war against drugs. I'm into listening to COINTELPRO. I'm into listening to a lot of different conspiracies. And Conspiracy Therapy is a podcast where they go over different conspiracies very in-depth and detail. And it's a very good podcast. So if you like conspiracy theories and you got some time, you should check out that. It's called Conspiracy Therapy, and it's a very good, interesting podcast. Another one of the very interesting podcasts that I want to talk about. Give me 1 second. We're going to take a short break and come right back.
Thought that I was stronger.
What up, though, everybody? We back. And what I was saying before, I had to take a quick break. And had to take a quick break because my homeboy mom's dropped off some fried chicken and home-style fries. And I really don't eat that much fried food nowadays. I'm on a strict baked food vegetable diet. I love fried chicken, and it's nothing better than somebody's mother, preferably a black mom, fried chicken. I love fried chicken, and it's nothing better than some good home-style fries with some fried chicken. So I did have to take a break for that. But and FYI, fried food is not good for you, especially if you African American. I would like to say, watch out for the fried food that you intake. Go get your levels checked because the cholesterol, diabetes thing is real. The high blood sugar thing is real. So yeah, please just check up, go get checked out. Make sure you stay healthy, stay up on your health, get active, and we'll be having some upcoming episodes from Cheryl about fitness and everything. So that'll be cool. So we got some episodes coming up to promote fitness and promote good living and good quality. You have to take care of yourself. This is all about a spiritual, mental, and body journey to greatness. So yeah. Um, so another podcast that I like to listen to is a podcast called Trappers Anonymous. Trappers Anonymous is a podcast that I came across by just searching a lot of different podcasts. I think I was listening to somebody and they suggested to go check out this podcast, but it's a podcast called Trappers Anonymous, and it's like an informative podcast. It covers all culture, races, and background. It touch on taboo topics and like different fields of interest, different lifestyles, and it's all while the interviewee is kept completely anonymous by getting his voice disguised, and they go in depth into different lives. If you ever see Vice Underworld or those shows, Drugs Inc. or something like that, it's kind of like that, like a docu series, but kind of like an informative style. So that's a very good one. They go really in depth. It's not all real life, and I think that's just a disclaimer. But I think what they're trying to do is just bring knowledge and information to people about different subjects, from like prostitution, male dancing, female dancing, bartending, street life, hustling. They do episodes on credit repair. One of the interesting topics that I listened to on the episode was they interviewed somebody who had HIV, and they spoke candidly about how, why, what happened, their emotional response, and how they dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. And it was very informative. I also heard stories from a guy how to successfully try to navigate through the stock market, and it's just a lot of information in the Trapper Anonymous episodes that I think everybody will be very, 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 very appreciative of. So please go check out that podcast. It's called Trappers Anonymous by Chris Styles. It's a very, very good informative. If you like Viceland type of informative journalism or investigation journalism, check out this podcast. It's called Trappers Anonymous. It's a very good podcast. Another podcast that I listen to quite often nowadays is the Joe Rogan podcast. It's slowly becoming one of my favorite podcasts. Joe Rogan podcast, I think it's been on since around 2009 or 10-ish. And I first listened to the podcast for over a year. Then I just started recently watching episodes on YouTube. And when I say Joe Rogan podcast fills up like 60% of my free time television watching, which is very, very limited time. I learned a lot from his show. They have different guests on there that's very informative. Everything from religion to politics to fitness to acting. He has all type of comedians. It's a very informative show. All the guests on there, they talk about a wide range of topics, but they also get in depth about their specialty topics, like whatever they like to, what are their specialty. Like they might have a sleep study guy on there, and they might talk about Caitlyn Jenner, but also he will go in deep about sleep studies and the effect that sleep has on the body. And I really enjoy listening to him. I got a lot of key pointers and tips about training from watching Extreme Runner. He had a lady on the show one time. She was an extreme long distance trail runner, and she was talking about running a race, the Moab. Oh man, it's called the Moab something. It's a race, and it was like an outdoor endurance race. And she stayed up for like almost 3 days straight, but only slept for, I think she said, 1 minute. So yeah, that was very interesting. But Joe Rogan is a very interesting podcast. Eddie Bravo, one of his oncoming friends and guests, he's a very big conspiracy theory head, and that's what I obviously am to, conspiracy theories. And it's very interesting listening to them go back and forth. I really enjoy listening to the episodes with comedian Joey Diaz. It's very information. I love hearing people share their story, especially people that you can look up to and the wiser elders, or maybe OGs if you want to call it. I love listening to stories because that's how you gain the passed down knowledge from people that's already experienced the journey. So it's a very informative podcast. So I would suggest everybody go check out the Joe Rogan podcast. And he also mixed in a lot of MMA, a lot of mixed martial arts, a lot of jiu-jitsu, Muay Thai, different athletes and different actors, and it's a very good show. I suggest everybody go check that out, the Joe Rogan show. Another one of my favorite special additions to the Joe podcast list is TED Talks. TED Talks is a conference, I guess, lecture style talks. Okay, let me break it down. So TED is a media organization. I think TED holds a conference. They specialize in like technology, and I wonder what would you call the sole purpose of the actual company. I guess would it be like they hold a conference about tech and design, and it's like a Silicon Valley type based company, and they hold conferences every year in like Vancouver and Britain. And inside the conferences, they have lectures from everybody inside the technology, architectural design, humanitarian relief. It's different guest speakers that host different events at their conferences, and they always post free content online of the lectures, and they're short. You can find them in short form or longer form. I like to listen to the short form one, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and it's always so informative, just about how the world works, the tech of the world, the like I said, the humanitarian relief of the world, everything. It's very informative. It has a lot of key points that'll help you stay on what's going on today in today's world, what's going on for the future. A lot of it has to do with the future. It's a very tech-based conference, so the lectures are always about computers, about information, how to get information and people faster, how to get everybody to point A to point B faster, and I really enjoy it. It's very mind-opening to hear different lectures from different speakers, from different point of views and different walks of life, especially when it's talking about progressing our world as itself further in the future. And us as African Americans, man, and as blacks, I think we really need to start getting involved in making plans for the future. That's a very important thing that has to do with us rebuilding the structure to our culture and making our culture more promising and making our future more promising for our young, so we can start bridging that generational wealth gap that we have, that's allowing us to keep on rebirthing generations in this poverty that we're in, that we're almost like stuck in. So that's a big thing. Check out TED Talks. Another podcast that I listen to is Drink Champs. Drink Champs is a very important podcast for the culture of hip hop. Drink Champs is a podcast by rapper Noreaga, which also has an eating show called Nori on the Run. Eating. Noreaga is a part of the famous rap group CNN. I don't know if you know CNN, and Capone Noreaga is a big deal in hip hop. Nori been around for a long time, and he always been very charismatic, very comfortable sharing his opinions on things. He's very he know how to work a room. Everybody loves him. He's well respected, and he's been in this hip hop game for a long time. Really earned his stripes in it. And a part of his show is interviewing legends, giving legends their roses while they still can smell them. And that's a big deal in our community because we lose so many people early and unexpectedly that we stop and we sometimes forget to show people appreciation while they're here. So Drink Champs definitely do that. They interview a lot of different legends of hip hop and legends in this culture, period. And it's a format to where they're sponsored by like Ciroc, I think, and there's a lot of drinks flowing there. Getting drunk, they're telling stories. It's very, very interesting. I love the Drink Champs. I love listening to a hip hop outlook on how everything's going. You know, I like listening to stories. That's one thing about Drink Champs. What you're gonna get is stories about hip hop events in the past, and a lot of times rappers they get a little buzzy and they start spilling the beans on stories that you might not have ever heard about stuff that went down in hip hop that might have not at a time where it wasn't no internet, where you had to get everything word to mouth. So it's very interesting hearing those stories, and I'm very appreciative as a hip hop guy, you know, as a child of hip hop that grew up to be an adult of hip hop. Like, it's just very important. So if you want to listen to a hip hop podcast, I suggest check out the Drink Champs podcast. Very good, very funny, very enlightening. A lot of hip hop stories. Go check it out. Another important podcast that I listen to, one of my special podcasts that I hold very close, and that I eventually we're gonna have them as guests on this podcast and on my other podcast. We also be bringing them on and do some collaboration situations too, and that's the Blue Magic Podcast. The Blue Magic Podcast is a podcast created by two of my college friends, Shorty 52 and J Rock, along with their friend Hees, and it's a 90s style R&B and hip hop based podcast. Very, very funny. They do a lot of top lists, a lot of who's who of the 90s hip hop, a lot of throwback jams. It's a very, very funny and informative podcast. And I also love it because they're young, black, educated creators that always, since I've been knowing them, go out and get what they want. And it's very refreshing. It's very motivational to hear my college friends like doing a podcast, because I love hip hop. I love 90s hip hop. I'm an 80s baby, so I grew up in the 90s. So that's what I really like. I love hearing a take on different things. And even on my other podcast, Shut the Front Door, we'll be going over some of their topics that they discuss, because, you know, we have an opinion about it because we all sit and listen to their podcast. And it's a very good podcast. I think they're on episode 10. So everybody go check out that their podcast is called the Blue Magic Podcast with their hosts is J Rock, Hees, and Shorty 52. Everybody should go check that out. Shouts out to them. They got a really dope podcast, man. Go check it out. And that's about it at the time for my list of podcasts of what I listen to. I have a wide variety of like honorable mentions. For instance, A Waste of Time with It's the Real is a podcast with two white boys that they do in a uptown Manhattan apartment. It's a good podcast. They I like to say they do a lot of in-depth interviews. It ranges across pop culture who they like to interview, but Waste of Time with It's the Real, and it's a hip hop based podcast too, so it's very good. It's a good podcast. But I have what I like to do is every so months I like to go through, kind of take out a couple, because if I just keep adding and adding podcasts in my podcast playlist and my favorite list, it just becomes almost unbearable and unlistenable. So I like to go through there every now and then, do a cleanup, keep about like maybe 10 on the list, because you got to think 10 podcasts an hour a piece. You don't have that many free times in an hour. You should be sleeping 8, working 8. You know what I'm saying? They kind of limit it down, but I definitely enjoy this platform. I enjoy being able to speak with you guys just about anything I'm going on. If I get some fried chicken so happen to deliver, I would like to be able to talk to you guys about it. I like to be able to talk to you guys about health and wealth. I'd be able to like to talk to you guys about what's going on with this world, as far as like why is everybody seeming not so motivated. I want to talk to you guys about less talking and more doing, about unlocking your pineal gland and, you know, getting to that third eye. Like, I want to get in deep with these conversations because I want to provide a platform that helps out. I want to provide a platform that provides information to people, that people can take something from it and really enjoy the conversation. And I like to thank everybody that coming out tonight, but coming to listen to me on today's episode, man. I like to give a shout out to my cousin D. Shout out Press. I like to give a shout out to Cali Just One Vintage Clothing. Everybody go check out my homeboy at Cali Just Ones. Everybody go check out my other podcast, Shed the Front Door podcast, over there at Instagram at Shed the Front Door, Shed DA Front Door. And this is another episode of Sunday Mornings with a Cup of Joe. I'm your host, Joe, and thanks for being tuned in.
If the work week is stressing you out and you're searching for a relaxing Sunday morning vibe, then come over and enjoy Sunday Mornings with a Cup of Joe with your host, Joey Stacks, as he takes you on a weekly journey for your soul that starts with a relaxing cup of Joe. So if you're in need of some great conversation with a splash of neo soul, then you're in the right place. So tune in as we catch a cool vibe with Sunday Mornings with a Cup of Joe.